Hello everybody, today we have another installment of the Krasnov file, another deep dive into Trump and KGB. Michael Sellers, he released one more article about this. We are about to look at it. So, Trump and KGB Part 2. Was Trump actually recruited on his 1987 Moscow trip? And subtitle, I'm an ex-CIA Russia specialist and here's my detailed assessment. Okay, it's not me, it's the Sellers, Michael Sellers, Mr. Sellers. So, this is part 2 of Trump and KGB. I'm generally working through it chronologically. In part 1, I looked at the 1970s and in particular the Czech STB long-running surveillance of Trump after his marriage to Ivana Zelnichkova in 1977. Now we are into the 1980s and the attention shifts to the recent claims that Trump was recruited by KGB during his 1987 Moscow trip. Following is a close look at those claims and my probability assessment of whether an actual recruitment occurred or not. In many such assessments, I've made an effort to separate what we A. know for sure, B. believe to be true with near certainty, and C. what remained highly speculative. So, introduction about recruitment and what the entire process entails as the KGB practiced it. A word of explanation. Recruitment is a part of a process and it's important to understand the process because any attempt at assessment of whether Trump was recruited or not only makes sense if you understand the process and some nuances of what recruitment might mean. The KGB recruitment process was methodical and was designed to identify, assess, and recruit individuals who could provide valuable intelligence, be influential, or provide useful support. The process typically involved several stages. First stage, spotting. Identifying individuals with access to desired information or influence. This could involve professionals such as diplomats, scientists, or business people. Second step, assessing. Evaluating the potential recruits' motivations, vulnerabilities, and suitability. Common motives exploited includes financial need, greed, then you offer financial incentives. Ideology, then you appeal to shared political beliefs. Ego, then you're flattering the individual sense of importance, grandiosity, and need for attention, admiration, and approval. Some emotional triggers that you can then exploit personal relationships or grievances. For example, a person who is in conflict with superiors in his organization and who feels he is undervalued. And last, compromise or compromat, using blackmail based on personal indiscretions. And comment. Neither the KGB nor CIA used compromat as a primary tool for the simple reason that a coerced, resentful agent is not likely to perform well. A better way to understand this is that, for example, the KGB would certainly be more than happy to create a scenario where compromat existed, but it might never be mentioned, just an unspoken item in the background. If used at all, its use would likely be more subtle than blatant blackmail. Third part, access. If a target appears promising, a mechanism providing access to the target for further assessment and development must be established. Fourth step, development. Building a relationship to gauge willingness and reliability. This phase might involve subtle requests for non-sensitive information to test compliance and establish trust. And fifth, step is recruitment itself, then formally engaging the individual as an asset. This could be a direct proposition or gradual realization by the recruit of their involvement. It could range from being a witting collaborator who worked in concert with KGB without receiving a direct salary, to being a fully controlled agent who is paid and fully engaged in the use of secrecy, etc. And the second stage is, after the recruitment, is handling, sixth stage, the stage after recruitment is handling, managing the asset to extract information or exert influence while ensuring their security and continued cooperation. Against the foreign backdrop of the process, the KGB categorized their assets based on their level and type of involvement and awareness. It could be confidential contact, someone in a position of influence who may not see themselves as an agent but provides information or assistance. Or then agent, an individual knowingly providing intelligence, often under a formal agreement and with specific tasks. The most well understood type of agent would be the one who provides secret information. Another high-level type of agent that is fairly well understood would be an agent of influence, someone who could influence the policies of the target country. And then they would be lower level agents, for example, access agents who provide introductions or access to targets of interest. One other distinction, you hear the term agent and asset used a lot. This is more of an English language distinction than a Russian language one, but it's important when assessing what may or may not have happened with Trump. An agent, as outlined above, would generally be a recruited, controlled asset, whereas other asset might not necessarily be a fully controlled agent. A confidential contact, for example, would be an asset, but not an agent. This may sound like splitting hairs, but it's important to an understanding of the Trump KGB story to have these distinctions in mind. We know for certain that the KGB had access to Trump and can reliably assess what the KGB assessed him as, that the KGB assessed him as a potential recruitment target. The 1987 Moscow trip unquestionably gave the KGB access to Trump. Such a trip could not have been offered or organized on the Russian side without security approvals and involvement by the Committee for State Security, the KGB. As for the trip itself, we know that in July 1987, Trump, accompanied by his wife Ivana and her assistant Liza Calandra, embarked on his inaugural visit to the Soviet Union. This trip was initiated by an invitation from Yuri Dubinin, the Soviet ambassador to the United States, who had previously engaged Trump during a luncheon in New York City. During their stay, the Trumps were accommodated in the Lenin Suite at the National Hotel in Moscow, a location historically significant as it had once housed Vladimir Lenin. The suite was situated near Red Square and was known to be under KGB surveillance, implying that Trump's activities were likely monitored during his visit. Throughout the trip, Soviet officials escorted Trump to various sites in Moscow and Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, discussing potential real estate ventures, including the construction of a luxury hotel in Moscow. Although these discussions did not culminate in immediate business deal, the visit marked the beginning of Trump's long-standing interest in establishing a presence in the Russian market. In addition to knowing the foregoing about the 1987 trip, We also know from declassified Czech intelligence files that following Trump's marriage to Ivana Zelnichkova in 1977, the Czechoslovak Secret Service initiated a surveillance operation codenamed Ivana. The STB monitored Trump's activities, including his business ventures and political aspirations, and undoubtedly shared intelligence with the KGB. This went on for a number of years. The various claims about the 1987 trip and possible recruitment. We know that 3 former KGB officers, Yuri Shvets, Alnur Musaev, and he didn't write the third one. I think Sergei Zhernov was the third one. Have discussed Donald Trump's interactions with the KGB during 1980s, particularly focusing on his 1987 visit to Moscow. Their perspectives, while overlapping in certain areas, offer distinct insights. Alnur Musaev claims. Recruitment assertion. Musaev, who served in the 6th Directorate of the USSR's KGB, responsible for recruiting businessmen from capitalist countries, he claims that during Trump's 1987 visit to Moscow, the KGB recruited him as an intelligence asset under the codename Krasnov. Michael Seller's comment. Although it is confirmed that Musaev served in the 6th Directorate, it also appears that during the critical period around 1987, he was seconded to a unit in the Ministry of the Interior that had similar responsibilities to the KGB 6th Directorate. But that would mean there is some question about his direct access to the recruitment he claims happened. So meaning he wasn't in that department at the time of recruitment, and so he might not know about that. I mean, he might not be directly involved in that. Then Yuri Shvets' perspective, cultivation over recruitment. Shvets, a former KGB major in the 1st Chief Directorate, and the 1st Chief Directorate is the KGB unit that sent officers overseas to work undercover, who served in Washington from 1985 to 1987, indicates that the KGB had been cultivating Trump as an asset for several years, starting from his marriage to Ivana Zelnichkova in 1977. He suggests that Trump's 1987 Moscow visit was part of his long-term cultivation strategy. He uses the term special unofficial contact to describe the relationship in the aftermath of 1987 trip. So he is not claiming, Shvets not claiming that Trump was formally recruited. Post-visit activities. Shvets points out that following the 1987 trip, Trump took out full-page newspaper ads criticizing U.S. foreign policy and defense spending, stances that aligned with Soviet interests at the time. Sergei Zhernov's perspective. Zhernov, an ex-KGB officer residing in France, has supported claims that Trump was being actively cultivated by the KGB at the time of the trip to Moscow in 1987. Where all 3 former KGB officers highlight while all 3 former KGB officers highlight the significance of Trump's 1987 Moscow visit in the context of KGB operations, their narratives differ slightly. In particular, Musaev explicitly asserts that Trump was recruited as a KGB agent during the 1987 trip, assigning him the codename Krasnov. Shvets emphasizes a prolonged cultivation process, with the 1987 visit serving as a pivotal moment in the KGB efforts to influence Trump, but stops short of confirming formal recruitment. In addition to the assertion made by Alnur Musaev and Yuri Shvets regarding Donald Trump's alleged recruitment by the KGB during his 1987 Moscow visit, Other non-KGB sources and individuals have echoed similar claims. Luke Harding's investigations. KGB orchestration of 1987 Moscow visit. British journalist Luke Harding, in his 2017 Political article, posited that Trump's 1987 trip to Moscow was likely orchestrated by the KGB as a part of their effort to cultivate Western individuals susceptible to flattery and ambition. Harding suggests that the KGB Political Intelligence Department, under directives from first Chief Directorate Head Vladimir Kryuchkov, targeted Trump due to his political aspiration and ego. Comment. I agree with most of the foregoing. We know for sure that Kryuchkov had issued a directive to recruit foreign businessmen, for example, and it is reasonable assumption that KGB political intelligence was largely running the show for the visit. But this does not equate to recruitment. Oleg Kalugin's allegations. Potential KGB asset since 1987. Former KGB general Oleg Kalugin alleged that Trump could have been a KGB asset since his 1987 visit to Moscow. Kalugin claimed that the operation to lure Trump began with an overture in March 1986 by Soviet ambassador to the United Nations, Yuri Dubinin, leading to Trump's Moscow trip the following year. These accounts, while varying in specifics, collectively suggest that Trump's 1987 Moscow visit was a focal point for KGB efforts to cultivate or recruit him as an asset. So, KGB was interested in him, they invited him, and they were developing him before, they were assessing him, and then probably they asked him to have greater access to him during his visit. They asked him to visit Moscow and then flattered him, then they lead him by the nose to show him the possible investment opportunities, possibility to erect Trump Tower just in front of Kremlin. Okay, the question is, where is this Trump Tower? Still none of it. So it was just a way to lure him into some kind of relationship. So, did KGB influence play a role in Trump's post-1987 trip actions? Almost certainly yes. An indicator of what might have happened in Moscow is what were Trump's actions afterwards. In 1987, shortly after his return from Moscow, Donald Trump made a notable foray into the realm of US foreign policy by purchasing full-page advertisement in major newspapers including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Boston Globe. These ads, collectively costing approximately $97,801, bore the headline, "There is nothing wrong with America's foreign defense policy that a little backbone can't cure." The letters took issue with the US providing financial support to allies who were capable of shouldering more of their own defense burden. This marked Trump's entry into the national political scene via policy positions that mirrored Soviet propaganda points and, if implemented, would drive a wedge between the United States and its allies, something that also aligned with Soviet goals. And we can see that he is doing the same thing right now. So almost, 40 years later, he is doing the same thing. 87, yeah, almost. So he is actually abandoning United States allies in Europe, what he was proposing in 1987 already. So that was his goal all along. Many who are now examining Trump's history of involvement with Russian intelligence point to this as evidence of KGB influence. Schwetz, for example, notes that this action was reportedly celebrated by the KGB as a successful active measure, reflecting the agency's influence on Trump's viewpoints. Bottom line assessment. Here is my bottom line assessment. It is 100% certain that KGB assessed Trump, gained access to him with the trip to Moscow, and used the trip to develop and cultivate him as a potential asset and perhaps at some point a recruited agent. This much I would consider to be virtually 100% certain. As to whether he was recruited or not, I would first of all refer to the spectrum I discussed above. Think of the spectrum from target on one end and then all the steps of assessment, development, confidential contact, and agent. I think there is a high probability that Trump has reached or was on the cusp of becoming a confidential contact by the time he left Moscow. Schwetz used the term special in official contact, and I find that credible. This is not altogether in conflict with Musaev's claim of recruitment. Such status would have, for example, resulted in a code name being issued, and so Krasnov may well have been the name given to Trump as an asset, not yet agent, at least at this point. What would such a relationship signify? To Trump, it would likely seem satisfyingly transactional. He would have, I think, opportunities for accumulating wealth with the help of his new friends, whom he would feel no hesitation to help since he could rationalize it all as good for business and good for relations between the two countries. As a private businessman, he had no government secrets to reveal, and as a result, he would more likely see his relationship on terms of business development than espionage. A layer on top of this that Trump might have been somewhat aware of is that the Soviet contacts seem to clearly recognize and appreciate his business acumen and overall brilliance, the flattery factor. And if, for example, they encourage him to test the political waters, it was, he would interpret, because they were astute and not necessarily because they were manipulating him. So by the time the 1987 trip was over, I would have said that Trump was definitely substantially far down the development path and was likely engaged in some form of special and official contact that would have left the KGB convinced they had an asset, while Trump himself would view it as a mutual transactional cooperation. Another observation I would make is that it seems very likely to me that the idea of taking out ads to make a political point would likely have originated with the KGB, at least in part as a way of testing whether Trump would in fact follow through on any influence effort they suggested. The fact that he did follow through no doubt would have left them encouraged that this was indeed potentially a productive cooperating contact. Why not recruited agent? It is still entirely possible that the KGB had gone all the way to a full recruitment by the time he left Moscow. But I would rate this as a possibility not to be excluded rather than the most likely reality. First of all, the KGB is not generally in a rush, and although they would have been watching him for a long time, as far as I have been able to determine, this would have been the first time they had clear hands-on access to him in a controllable environment. So, just in terms of the pacing of it, it would feel a bit rushed to push all the way to a full recruitment right then, during the first trip to Moscow. Secondly, I don't think they would have felt they really needed to push it that far at this point. Trump didn't have state secrets to sell. His value was more of a long-term proposition, and getting it to the point of a sustainable, cooperative, continuing contact would have been a win without risking the potential blowback of premature recruitment pitch gone wrong. Thirdly, I would only source reporting that truly places him farther along the recruitment spectrum than what I have. The only source reporting that truly places him further along the recruitment spectrum than what I have indicated here is Musayev. And I think there is a room for Musayev's claims to still be viewed as generally compatible with this view. Recruitment could mean full recruitment with control, or it could mean something less formal and more like what I have described. Musayev appears to have been reasonably close to this operation, but not actually in it. And there is the question about him having been seconded to the Ministry of Interior at this time, so it's possible his access to the information was not direct and immediate. Anyway, I know some will find it disappointing that I am not able to jump on the recruited agent bandwagon, but the evidence, in my view, does not support this as the most likely situation as of the end of the Moscow trip in 1987. I've provided all the basis for reaching that provisional conclusion, and I welcome new information, clarifications, and or other opinion based on the same information or on new information. Please feel free to comment or DM with any such opinion or information. Meanwhile, the Trump KGB story continues. Next up, the 90s. Thank you for watching. Until next time. Slava Ukraini!